$20 million. In 1977, that wasn't just a number. It was an execution warrant for a nation's economy. One day, full of gilded carriages and ermine robe, one man's obsession with a dead French emperor. 1/3 of a country's entire annual budget incinerated in a single ceremony. While the world watched a bizarre parody of Napoleonic grandeur, the ledgers of the Central African Republic were being bled white. This wasn't just an eccentric party, it was a calculated liquidation of a nation's future. This is the audit of the Central African Empire, a study in vanity, diamond diplomacy, and the ultimate cost of an unchecked ego. To understand the bankruptcy of 1977, we have to look at the books from a decade earlier. Jean-Bédel Bokassa was not born into royalty. He was a creature of the French colonial military machine, a captain in the French army, a veteran of Indochina, and a man who understood the world through the lens of rank and command. When he seized power on New Year's Eve in 1965, he didn't inherit a wealthy nation, but he inherited a strategic gold mine. The Central African Republic sat on the big three of African commodities: high-grade diamonds, massive uranium deposits in Bakuma, and endless tracts of tropical timber. In the mid-1960s, the country was a fledgling republic trying to find its fiscal footing. Bokassa's initial business model was simple: centralize everything. He didn't just become the president, he became the sole signatory for every major resource contract in the country. By the early 1970s, he held over 12 ministerial portfolios simultaneously. He was the Minister of Defense, the Minister of Information, and crucially, the Minister of Finance. In any standard audit, this is the ultimate red flag. There was no separation between the state treasury and Bokassa's personal wallet. The national budget became a black box. Profits from the diamond mines in the Haute-Koto region stopped flowing into infrastructure and started flowing into offshore accounts in the Presidential Fund. This was the beginning of the silent ledger, a shadow economy where the nation's wealth was being systematically diverted to fund a lifestyle that the country's GDP could never actually support. By 1976, the title of President for Life had lost its luster. Bokassa suffered from a profound Napoleonic complex. He saw himself as the African successor to Bonaparte, a man of destiny who could transform a landlocked, impoverished nation into a global empire through sheer force of will and aesthetics. He officially dissolved the republic and declared the Central African Empire. But an empire is a high-maintenance asset. It requires a specific brand of legitimacy that can only be bought through spectacle. Bokassa didn't want a local celebration. He wanted a ceremony that would force the world, and specifically France, to treat him as a peer. The planning for the coronation of Bokassa I began not in the capital of Bangui, but in the luxury workshops of Paris. This was the moment the fiscal trajectory shifted from concerning to terminal. The coronation wasn't planned based on available liquidity, it was planned based on a fantasy with the assumption that the silent partners in Europe would foot the bill to keep the uranium flowing. Bokassa began placing orders that would make an 18th century monarch blush. The logistics alone were a fiscal nightmare. Bangui had no deep-water port and no functional railway connection to the coast. Every single luxury item, every bottle of champagne, every yard of velvet, every bag of cement for the new imperial monuments had to be airlifted or trucked through thousands of miles of jungle at a massive premium. Let's break down the line items of this fiscal catastrophe. When we look at the 1977 expenditure reports, the numbers are staggering when adjusted for inflation. First, the throne. Bokassa commissioned a 2-ton bronze eagle gilded in 24-karat gold. It was created by the French sculptor Olivier Brice. The cost was roughly $2.5 million in 1977. Next, the wardrobe. He turned to the house of Guérini, the same tailors who had worked for the French elite. He ordered a pearl-encrusted suit and a velvet cloak that was over 30 feet long, trimmed with ermine fur. Then there was the crown. It featured an 80-carat centerpiece. The value of the stones alone represented the entire annual health and education budget for a significant portion of the country. Bokassa wanted a modern Roman triumph. He ordered 60 brand-new Mercedes-Benz 600 limousines from West Germany. Because the country had fewer than 100 miles of paved roads, these high-performance machines were mechanically destroyed within months of the ceremony. He ordered 22,000 bottles of Moet and Chandon champagne and 40,000 bottles of vintage wine. He even flew in 100 thoroughbred horses from France and Belgium, along with dozens of ornate carriages. Most of the horses died shortly after arrival, unable to cope with the tropical heat and local diseases. The total bill for the afternoon was estimated at $20 to $25 million. At the time, the Central African Republic's total annual budget was roughly $60 million. He spent 1/3 of the nation's yearly liquidity on a 4-hour event. A common question in this audit is, how did the checks clear? The answer lies in the hidden balance sheets of international geopolitics. This was the peak of France-Afrique, a system of post-colonial influence where France maintained control over strategic resources through the support of local strongmen. Bokassa's silent partner was the French president, Valéry Giscard d'Estaing. To Paris, Bokassa was a stable source of uranium, which was vital for France's nuclear energy independence. In exchange for this security, France provided the cash injections that kept the empire from immediate collapse. This relationship was lubricated by what became known as the Diamonds Scandal. Bokassa wasn't just a client, he was a donor. He frequently gifted high-value gemstones to French politicians, including Giscard d'Estaing himself. These weren't diplomatic gestures, they were payments to ensure that the French treasury would continue to subsidize the imperial fantasy. When Bokassa needed money for his coronation, France provided the development aid that covered the invoices. It was a closed loop of corruption. French taxpayers funded the aid, Bokassa spent it on French luxury goods, and the politicians received diamonds as a commission. By 1979, the party was over and the hangover was lethal. The coronation had drained the country's liquid reserves. The civil service, the backbone of the nation, hadn't been paid in months. Schools were falling apart, and the hospitals had no medicine. In a desperate move to find a new revenue stream, Bokassa turned to a classic monopoly tactic. He issued a decree that every school child in the country must wear a specific, high-cost uniform. The catch? These uniforms could only be purchased from one factory, which was owned by Bokassa and his family. In April 1979, the students of Bangui took to the streets. These weren't revolutionaries. They were children who couldn't afford the price of admission to their own education. Bokassa's response was brutal. The military was ordered to crush the protests. Hundreds of children were arrested and taken to Ngaragraba prison. Reports began to circulate that the emperor himself had visited the prison to participate in the executions. The optics were now too toxic, even for the French. Paris realized their strategic asset had become a massive liability. In September 1979, France finally called in the debt. While Bokassa was on a state visit to Libya, French paratroopers launched Operation Barracuda. They landed at the airport, took control of the capital, and restored the Republic in a matter of hours. There was no grand battle. The empire vanished the moment the French subsidies were withdrawn. When the new administration entered the palace, they found the physical remnants of the madness. The golden throne, the empty champagne crates, and the unpaid invoices from Parisian jewelers. But they also found a nation in total ruin. The empire had left behind zero infrastructure. The schools were empty, the roads were gone, and the country was saddled with a debt load that would stifle growth for the next 40 years. Jean-Bédel Bokassa died in 1996, but the ledger of his reign remains open. His story is a warning about the fragility of national economies in the face of absolute power. It's a reminder that when a leader treats a country as a personal bank account, the citizens are the ones who pay the interest for generations. The Central African Republic is still one of the poorest nations on Earth today, not because it lacks resources, but because its foundations were liquidated decades ago to pay for a crown that no one wanted to wear. History has closed the books on the emperor, but the debt of his vanity is still being paid.